Hey, I'm Pastor Ryan Heller. For the last 20 years, I've been pastoring and planting the churches that I have started. Church planting is something I am currently doing. I'm now on my third church start, and it's something I've thought a lot about. Today, I want to have some fun. I want to share with you my 10 greatest surprises about church planting. I was 31 years old when I planted my first church, and needless to say, things turned out differently than I thought that they would have. And so I want to give you my top 10 surprises. Maybe you're a church planter, you want to share this with somebody, or you want to take some notes. Maybe you're thinking about planting a church, or maybe you are planting a church. You'll identify with some of the things I'm sharing with you. But the first surprise was that planting was a lot harder on my family than I thought that it would be. I knew it would be hard on me. It was a lot harder on my kids and my wife than I thought it was. I was a little naive to that. You know, I grew up in the home of a stockbroker. My dad almost never talked about going to work. He worked a lot, but we just didn't talk about it as a family. And then when he came home at the end of the day, he didn't do work anymore. On the weekends, if he did a little work, you know, he never discussed it with us. I never met anybody that he worked with. I think I went to his office maybe like one or two times in my entire life. But you know what? If your dad's a pastor, you are involved in the church from start to finish. If you're on a church planting family, if you're in a church planting family and you're a kid, you're intimately involved in all aspects of the church. You go to services every Sunday, you go to kids ministry, you go to youth group. Your wife is friends with all of the members. Your kids know all the other kids. And there have been times where some of my kids' best friends have left the church, and sometimes my kids didn't even get to tell them goodbye. There's been times where we've hosted things in our own home. Membership classes and counseling sessions and trainings and all kinds of other things like that. And I just found church planting to be a lot harder on my family than what I expected. I was probably a little bit naive about that. Now, I'm thankful to God that my family loves church planting and that they love being a part of the ministry like that. But at the same time, it was more difficult than I thought. So number one, my first greatest surprise was that church planting was a lot harder on my family than I expected that it would be. A second surprise that I had is that to grow the church, it's more important to focus on the culture of the church than the systems of the church. Now, I focused heavily on the systems in my first church start. In my second church start, focused a little bit more on culture, and that church grew a lot more. But it's easier to focus on systems because systems are more measurable. They're more objective. Sometimes the culture of the church is more subjective, but you're going to get a lot further along if the church has a defined culture and the leadership understands what that culture is, and that culture is driving the church. Every organization and business has a culture. A culture is that set of unwritten rules that determine how an organization runs, what the values are, and what the practices are. The culture is kind of like the vibe of a church. Like when people come into the church, are people kind of uptight? Are people kind of laid back? What's the vibe? Those are driven by culture. In fact, recently I was at a church that was very laid back, and the people sitting next to us whipped out their breakfast burritos to eat during the sermon, and they were asking the other family members, "Hey, can you pass the queso? Hey, do you have some hot sauce?" during the sermon. And although that's not really my thing, this church had definitely produced a very casual, a very come-as-you-are culture. And that was very appropriate for what was going on in that cultural context. So, Pastor, what are your cultural distinctives? What are the things that make your church unique? Your church is going to grow more if you will focus more on the culture than just on the systems. Sam Chad says that culture, not vision or strategy, is the most powerful factor in any organization. It determines the receptivity of staff and volunteers to new ideas. It unleashes or dampens creativity. It builds or erodes enthusiasm, and it creates a sense of pride or deep discouragement about working there. So think about the culture. Think about the culture. The culture, again, is hard to measure. One of my favorite books is by Kevin Gerald about church culture, but there's several others that are great as well. I wish I would have known as a younger church planter, focus on that culture. Become a culture critic and design that culture, man, according to the vision that God gives to you. So number one is church planting was a lot harder on my family than I thought that it was. Number two, culture is more important than systems. Here's a third surprise. A third surprise is that most people are not pioneers, okay? Now, I'm a church planter, man. I'm on my third church plant. I love to start things. I've started businesses. I've started ministries. I've started churches. I love to start things. To me, I get so excited about starting new things. But to my amazement, most people are not like me, doggone it. And I expected that people would be a lot more gung-ho about starting a new church and starting new ministries. We were able to build a great launch team, but it was harder than I thought that it would be. It was harder to get that church off the ground because not everybody was as excited as I was. A lot of people said, Ryan, once your church gets started, then I'll come and visit. In other words, I'm not a pioneer. And so I've had to learn to be more patient, and I've had to learn to be more understanding with the fact that most people just don't wake up in the morning and enjoy changing everything and starting a bunch of new things. Most people are not like me. Now, if you're truly a church planter, you love to start new things. If you don't love to start new things, never be a lead planter. You could be on a church planting team, but don't be the lead planter. But when you have that desire and that drive, God will use that greatly, but you just got to be patient with other people that are around you. Number four, okay? Not everybody's a pioneer. That's number three. Number four, check it out. This was so surprising to me. It requires different skill sets from pastoring an established church. Church planting is totally different from pastoring established churches. Now, the two churches that I was a staff member at before becoming a church planter were churches, one was over 100 years old, and I think one was almost 150 years old. Nothing could be more different than a church plant than a super, a mega church that's super old, like a century plus old. Totally different. In an established church, you have multiple generations of people. Sometimes the grandparents, sometimes even the great-grandparents went to that church. In a church plant, nobody went to your church. Everyone is brand new. And so people will come quicker and they will leave faster, which is something that we can talk about more a little bit later. But it's a different skill set. Establishment versus pioneering. In a church plant, you thrive on creativity, ingenuity, nimbleness, speed, so many other things. In established church, sometimes I have pastor friends that pastor established churches. One little decision might take a year to bring the church along to make that decision. Whereas in a church plant, you could make that in 10 minutes and it wouldn't be a big deal. So the leadership style, the pace is totally different. And if you try to pastor a church plant like an established church, you'll kill it. Because in a church plant, you have to move quick. You don't have a choice. You'll die. The margin of error is small. You have to make choices quickly. I'll never forget, a few years ago, I was pastoring a church where a great tragedy happened. There was a theater shooting, and one of our church members was shot and sent to the hospital. And he immediately started telling the media that he had forgiven the gunman. And so people started calling the church. I don't know how they found out that this guy was a member of my church, but people started calling the church saying, Ryan, what do you think about this? And I realized that, man, our community was really, really hurting and needed ministry, and people were looking to me. I was kind of thrown into this. Our church was only a couple of years old. We were meeting at a dirty middle school. And on Tuesday afternoon, we made the decision to add a third service that Sunday. And I'd actually been out of town. I flew back on Monday night to try and figure out what we were going to do. Tuesday morning, we decided to add a third service. Our church was averaging 300 people in 2 services. The next Sunday, because we added that third service, we had over 700 people at church at the middle school. 20 people committed their lives to Christ. This is in the middle of July, okay? Not exactly like peak church attendance month. And then we started averaging 50 more people a week every week thereafter. And then by the time we got to August, we were running over 400 people. So God used that nimbleness, that quickness, that speed. And we had to be creative, and we had to really, really, really hustle to pull that off. But I think that would have been extremely difficult at an established church. But you know, if you're a church planter, man, you got lots of opportunities to do things that the older established churches in your community will never do. And so it can be a great advantage as well. Here's a fifth surprise. My fifth surprise, my most loyal people were not established Christians. You know, established Christians, when they come to church, they want programs, they want lots of staff, they want lots of budgets, they want lots of buildings. When you're a church planter, you probably have none of those, okay? I remember somebody asking me, you know, Pastor, when are we going to Uganda on a mission trip? I'm like, man, we ain't going to Uganda. Are you kidding me? We're trying to figure out how to have church on Sunday. I'm sorry, we're not going to Uganda this weekend, you know? Or why don't we have this kids program on Wednesday nights? Well, you know, the truth is, we're just trying to get some nursery workers for this weekend. We're a church start. And sometimes established Christians expect lots of programmings and lots of activities and lots of staff. You know, we just pay people to do things. I'll never forget, we had a class one night at the church, and some food fell on the floor, and one of our members said to another member, oh, don't worry about the food on the floor, the janitor will get that. And one of our church leaders overheard that and said, hey, by the way, we have a really nice building, but we have no janitors. Our church is 5 years old, and if we don't pick that up today, then the secretary is going to have to come in here tomorrow and clean that up. We need to clean that up. In other words, we didn't have janitors. We're a startup, man. It's not the same. Well, unfortunately, if people are established Christians that have been a part of big ministries, dynamic ministries, sometimes they bring their expectations on the startup, and it's not the same, and those people seem to be discouraged. However, I will tell you this. My most committed people have been people that I have personally led to Jesus. Those people are so grateful. They are so happy. They are so thrilled to be there, and they will do almost anything for the church because they are so determined to show their appreciation. I've had people give their life to Christ and then a few weeks later show up every morning at 6:30 to do setup on a Sunday morning while the church is meeting in a school. Now, it's hard to get established Christians to be on the setup team at 6:30 a.m. every Sunday morning, especially when it's really cold outside. So my most loyal church members were not the established Christians that had been members of 3 other churches. It was the new people that I led to Christ. Let me give you the first 5 of my greatest church planting surprises. Number 1, it's demanding on your whole family, not just you. Secondly, the culture of the church is more important for growth than the systems. Number 3, most people are not pioneers. Number 4, it requires different skill sets to pastor a church plant versus an established church. Number 5, my most loyal people were not established Christians. Hey, check out the second video. I want to share with you part 2 of my 10 greatest surprises as a church planter.